Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen. We're really delighted that this Zoom technology is allowing us to visit with two British authors. I want to point out that it's noon here, but it's 8 o'clock in England. So, ladies, raise your glasses.
Yes.
What can I say? I wish I had one. So, Rosie, you are on the left with the long blonde hair. To introduce Rosie. She's the author of Ghosted, which published in 2018 and is a major bestseller. And I was interested, Rosie, when I looked at it today, how many languages it's been translated into?
35 in total.
Wow.
I know. I was not expecting that. It remains quite a shock, actually.
So, this was your debut novel, do I have it right?
You do. Well, yes and no. It was my debut under my own name. I had written 4 novels previously under a pseudonym. They was, I guess, sort of. They started out as romantic comedies, but then they got a bit darker. And then this one was Ghosted was meant to be under that same pseudonym, but after I started writing it, just something completely different came out. So it's my first book under my own name. So certainly the first book that anyone in the States would have read of mine.
Well, when I looked it up today, I did notice that. Actually, that's the same career arc that authors here like Tess Gerritsen have traveled, where they started writing romance for Harlequin, and then their dark side took over, and here they are. So, Claire, it's so nice to see you again. You came to visit us with your first novel, which was, do I remember right, back in 2016 with I Let You Go?
It was, yeah. I toured in really early 2017 because I had a really odd experience of going to some incredibly cold places and then coming down to see you. And so I had a huge suitcase with clothes for all possible climates. January 2017, and we talked about I Let You Go, which was doing very well both sides of the pond, and then we talked a little bit about I See You, which was just about to come out. So I think your audience had some early copies that we handed out.
I think we did. We had advanced reading copies, and we did a tea here in the bookstore in the afternoon. Was this on your way to the American Library Association? You were here for some purpose.
Why was I? Do you know what? I was visiting lots of different places. I did go to the American Librarian Association, but I went this last year to Seattle. So I think 2017 was just a US tour, and I went all over the place, and I went to Canada, and what's lovely is that a lot of the readers that I met there are still with me, and I talk to them on Facebook, and they follow me on Instagram, and they're part of my book club, and that's all really great. So I've made some really great connections.
That's lovely. I felt really badly that an author, Stephanie Rubble, I don't know if you run across her book in this country. I'm trying to remember, it was called something Lovely Rose Gold or something. But anyway, her tour was canceled just as she was about to come here. And I feel so sad for her, to have had your first novel out and then it blows up like that. At least you had some traction, both of you, so it's a different
absolutely.
position.
I mean, Rosie, you've done lots of travelling as well, haven't you, with this book?
Yeah, quite a lot. But, again, luckily for me, as Barbara said, it came out significantly far away enough for me to not really been affected by this. But I'm a member of various sort of WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups of other writers, and I know so many people who are being published at the moment, who are just despairing because, books, it's certainly in the UK, people can't buy books, from bookstores at the moment. And it's, any kind of publicity tools or anything that people have planned have just sort of disappeared into thin air. So I think it's a difficult time, but I also think people still just really love reading, and, all of your online events that you're doing, Barbara, they're clearly really popular. People still want to read. They just, it's just harder to get hold of physical books at the moment.
It is harder.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious because I know that ebooks in the UK have been enormous, because it's actually been really hard to get your hands on physical, on hardback or paperbacks in the UK. I'm just wondering what your experience has been over there.
Well, we don't sell ebooks because they're
No,
completely
but,
profitless
you know,
for an independent bookstore. What we have noticed is a very large rise in audiobooks, and there is a very interesting outfit called Libro.fm, and they have arranged with independent bookstores. In fact, if you look for your book on our website, poisonpen.com, you will see there's a buy button for the audiobook, and they donate a certain amount of the sale. I don't remember what it is, and it varies because sometimes for example, yesterday at Juneteenth, they donated the profits from their sales that day to black-owned bookstores. So they have a lot of flexibility about what they do. So it does provide us with a little income stream. And I can certainly see why, at the moment, listening to audiobooks would have tremendous popularity. You're right about the physical books. The shipping system is so overburdened that what used to take 3 or 4 days now can take, like 2 weeks or something. So customers have had to put up with the drag. Anyway, Claire, as I mentioned to you, our discussion club, our Croak and Dagger, I love that name, met earlier today to talk about After the End. So, no, I'm sorry, wrong book.
They meant to talk about Let Me Lie.
Exactly. So thinking that they might have questions or that you might like to say a few words about Let Me Lie, let's do that first.
We can do. Do you know how hard it is, though, Barbara, to be writing? So as it stands, just to put you in the picture, when I can't remember any names of any of my characters, I'm writing books. I'm planning book 6. I'm editing book 5. I'm promoting After the End, which is book 4, and so Let Me Lie is book 3. Which I finished writing, I'm not sure, 3 years ago maybe, so trying to actually remember it. I do, of course, remember it. It is a psychological thriller based around a true life story that I can't talk about because it spoils the very twist around which the book revolves, which makes it one of those near impossible books to discuss as an author. But it's largely, I suppose, about suicide, and it's about family secrets and the things we discover about people after they disappear.
I understand that in a rare burst of unanimity, the discussion club all liked your book, so the discussion wasn't really all that brisk.
I'm so relieved because you're so forthright, Barbara, that I know that if they'd hated it, you just would have told me that, and I would have had to have sat here with a nice smile on my face and taken it on the chin.
No, I wouldn't have been so cruel. But you raised a really good point. One of the reasons that this is our 31st year, and in like year 2, I recognized when authors came to the store and were talking about their book, and someone would ask them the question, they would either get a deer in the headlights look or their faces would freeze and they would look frantically at me because, as you point out, they were not in that moment anymore. The book's already done and gone. So I worked out that the path to success with doing this would be for me to be the person who was up on the names, up on whatever, and could answer the questions, and then the author, could navigate it.
Yes,
So,
and it is this really weird situation whereby we as authors are so immersed in that book while we're writing it, and for a fair amount of time afterwards, and we know those characters inside out, and we live and breathe them. Probably, we probably spent more time with them than we do with our family, and yet it's a bit like breaking up with someone, and then you move on to the next best thing. It's like that meme where you're looking over your shoulder at the young woman walking behind. You're immediately your affections turn to the next book, and the guy before is just history.
that's probably one of the pulls of writing series for authors, and it's certainly a big pull for readers, is that while you exit the story, you don't exit the lives of the characters. My experience is, ladies, that when someone dies, the readers, they never say, oh, too bad about Mary. What they say is, I'm really going to miss. It's the characters, that because they don't really know you. They know your books, they know the characters, they don't know you particularly. But we've had, when Sue Grafton died, I can't tell you the absolute deluge of people who were desperate to talk about Kinsey and, you know, why there wouldn't be a Z. And I'll say we had all this, it was like they didn't know where to go, you know, to discuss their grief. And it was partly for Sue, but a lot of it was for Kinsey.
There's a lot that appeals to me about writing series, and I love the idea that you would start a new book and you'd know exactly where you were and you wouldn't have to, I mean, some of it's laziness, you know, the attraction of not having to create a whole new world and a cast of characters. But it's also quite constraining, isn't it? I don't know, would you ever write a series, Rosie?
I thought about it earlier in my career when I was writing romantic comedies, because I sort of thought commercially that would be a good idea. And like you say, the idea of being able to start a book where you know the characters inside out, as you say, they're your friends, they're almost your family, was obviously really appealing. I sort of assumed that it would take significantly less time to write, because all you've got to do really is build a plot. So I started coming up with some ideas for a sort of follow-on to my first ever novel under my pseudonym. And for a few days I felt really enthused, and then when I started writing it, within about 2 chapters I just started to stale. And I think unless you're setting out to write a series, your relationship with the characters, no matter how close you are to them, is finite, and it just sort of felt like I dug my characters up. It didn't feel authentic, and when I read through, it felt like, oh, here we are at first, oh, here we are in this familiar world. But it just felt forced. It just felt forced and a bit trite and a bit just a bit tired. So I abandoned it, and that was it. That was the end of that.
Well, that you've got two things. That firstly, that you're putting your series characters through an awful lot. Mm-hmm. You know, I was very tempted to give one of my characters in After the End, who happens to be cabin crew, a cameo in my next book, which is an aeroplane-based thriller. And it was just, you know, sort of an Easter egg. I really liked the idea of slipping her in. But then in terms of her actual life, to put someone through the trauma of dealing with the loss of a child, which is what she does in After the End, and then put her in a potential hostage situation, just seemed grossly unfair and unlikely.
Enough.
And yeah, and so unless your series character is a police officer or an investigator, it's highly unlikely that they would actually deal with horrific incident after horrific incident. And I was thinking recently that actually series crime novels have really changed. When you look at sort of classic series like Agatha Christie, they're really standalones. You don't get any sense of progression, as far as I recall, about Poirot's life. We don't have, you know, a big character arc. He doesn't move on. We don't have a private life. Same with Miss Marple. She just is all the same. You know, the same in every book. Whereas nowadays, I think readers are much more discerning, much more demanding, and you have to be a very clever writer to write a series that does 2 things. It satisfies the reader in that standalone book. It's got its narrative arc and it's completely complete, but it also is part of a bigger jigsaw puzzle that, you know, has the story of that series character. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do, and I take my hat off to successful series writers.
Me too.
You raise an interesting point. Poison Pen Press is the publisher in the United States of the British Library Crime Classics. So Martin Edwards, who's getting the Diamond Dagger this year, and bravo to him, is the series editor, and we've talked a lot about, you know, the sort of mystery that was successful in the 1930s or the 1940s. And even if the detective was the same, I could go back to Georgette Hare, because I love her Regency books. I could quote them, almost entire chapters by heart. But she really did write some interesting police procedurals. Her husband, the judge, I understand, helped her plot them, so they all worked out right.
Really?
But as you say, and the same thing was true with Travis McGee, let's say John D. MacDonald, or Ross MacDonald with Lou Archer. they would take a case and they would work the case, and then it was over. And then, without any big transition in their personal life, they would work another case. And that was very true in the Golden Age mysteries that Martin is bringing back.
It's also true of life, I think. When I think back, so I was a police officer for 12 years, and obviously I changed over those 12 years. But I couldn't hand on heart say that every single job I dealt with was transformational and, you know, made me a different person, and that I had a big domestic crisis and an alcohol problem and a drug problem and a gambling problem all the way through. And that each job happened to resonate with something in my personal life. I think that would be rather exhausting, actually, as a career.
Rosie, tell us about Ghosted.
Sure. It's funny, like Claire says, it's always funny when you have to go back and suddenly talk about it's like an ex-lover. I'm not writing my next book at the moment because I just had a baby 5 weeks ago. But you know, I had just finished my next book. So Ghosted is 2 back now, really. Right, so Ghosted is the story of Sarah, who believes that in Eddie she has found the love of her life. When they meet, they're both sort of around 40. Sarah's in the middle of a divorce from her long-term husband. And they have this really beautiful romance that unfolds over the course of a week in a very, a really beautiful part of the United Kingdom, sort of where I grew up, in the Cotswolds. And without warning, Eddie disappears. And Sarah initially assumes that he's just, being a cowardly man, but that's what the people around her think. But she's certain, really, deep down, that something more sinister has happened. So a lot of Ghosted is basically her quest to find out what happened. And when she does eventually discover what happened to him, and she does eventually, it's got nothing to do with him having changed his mind. It's actually the reason is quite tragic. So it's a funny old combination of things. Ghosted. It's a story about family. It's about loss. It's about grief and guilt and culpability and mental health and all sorts of things. But really, above all, it is a really epic love story, I guess. About second chances and forgiveness.
So this kind of books that I don't want to say the kind of books you write, that's not fair. There's a great affection and a great sales potential right now for what we seem to be calling domestic suspense, which is a little different than, let's say, a military fiction thriller or a big stakes international thriller. Do you both feel that this is a kind of book that women are more likely to read than men, that they identify with better than men? Either one of you could answer that, or both of you.
I'd be interested to know, first of all, Claire, if that's how you would define your book as well.
Well, okay, so there are 2 questions here then about the gender. So just looking at the term domestic suspense, first of all, I love as a term, because I think it covers such a big range of books that otherwise don't really fit in to anything. So it covers a lot of novels that might be crime, in that there is a crime in it, but isn't there a crime in 90% of books, even when they're not actually crime novels? So it covers those sorts of books, but it also covers books like mine, which is, I suppose, a medical drama, a family drama. It doesn't really fit anywhere, and so domestic suspense says exactly what it is. It's about a family, and it is suspenseful, and that's that's good enough for me. And I think it fits Ghosted quite well as well. Do you call it that, Rosie?
I still struggle, actually, to give it a compartment. And I've heard so many people call it different things. And what's been interesting, and I'm sure you have the same, Claire, because you've been translated into many languages too, is how each different territory handles it and how they pitch it to their readers. And when you're in the process of when your book is in an auction and there's different publishers trying to acquire it, it's really interesting how differently publishers within one country will see the book, and with mine, some wanted to position it as as a proper heartland romance. Others wanted to position it as as a suspense novel, and then there were a whole sea of other things in between. I think somebody has called it romantic suspense, which I think it also fits. But I agree. I also really like the term domestic suspense, because it is more about family mindful than it is about love. Well, that's the thing, and that's why you're right. It's such a good broad catch-all term.
Yeah, and I think there is a risk that the word domestic, because it's been used historically, certainly in the UK, it's a very disparaging term to refer to a petty argument. And so, people having a domestic at work or within neighbours, it means something very, very, ridiculous and trivial. And so there is a slight negative connotation to it. And I suspect that you're right, Barbara, that it's a genre that women are likely to be drawn to more than men. But women read more fiction than non-fiction. We know that's well evidenced across the world. And we also know that men generally have an issue reading books by women, and it's not necessarily an issue that they feel they have or that they acknowledge, but again, the evidence is there that women tend to buy books by both genders, and men tend to buy books written by men. Is that? You're a bookseller, Barbara. You can tell me that this is complete rubbish.
No, I won't. I think that we are in, as Rosie said, I think this is partly a cultural thing. I think it's also that we are divided by our common language, and so things mean one thing in UK parlance and a different one here. My bookstore has always been an anomaly. I have more men working for me than women. We have more male customers than we do women. Men are much more inclined to buy hardcover books and in large quantities. But as I have taken on staff, and they have taken on special interests, like one of them is really interested in romance and women's fiction. He's a notable reviewer for Library Journal and Book List and so forth, so he's developed a category that way. Pat, whom you heard for, is very much interested in science fiction and so forth. Our store does not sell books by genre or shelf books by genre. We have one file here. We have one file for fiction, and every book is there by author alphabetically. The only thing we separate out are the small paperbacks, which are disappearing anyway. The small format are being clobbered.
I love that. I love that everyone's books, because as someone who has written books, well, in fact, both of us, written books that potentially go on different shelves, that's a real problem for an author, because I obviously would love a reader of one of my books to discover my others. But if they go into most stores, certainly in the UK, they will find my first 3 novels shelved with psychological thrillers or crime novels, and after the end, on its own somewhere, with commercial fiction or literary fiction, or maybe on a table if I'm really lucky, but it's kind of potluck, which is slightly frustrating.
Well, you have to realize that in part this emphasis on categories and genre is because books are now sold not so much in bookstores, but basically, online in various formats. And really the book has to sell itself at that point. You're not appearing on Amazon book in hand to do a book discussion. We're interesting in the sense that 70% of our customers had never lived in Arizona, and 20% of that 70% are international. We ship books out of the U.S. every day. We have actually a large UK customer base, and sometimes, I love it, we end up sending books signed by British authors that come to us from London back across to UK customers who haven't figured out how to find them. So, so for us, if you look at our website, I write literally tens of thousands of words a week sometimes in terms of promotion. We are now doing Zoom events. We just opened an IGVT account, and you can go and watch me talk to Ian Rankin, for example, now for 45 minutes on Instagram, thanks to IGTV. My husband, who's become an audio engineer, is turning all of these into podcasts, so you will have a podcast of this event in your hands tomorrow. then they post on Facebook, and we also have a YouTube channel. So in all of that, there would be absolutely no point in trying to label a book, right?
No.
I mean, none. So as I say, we're so atypical of how books are sold that we can do a lot of things that I think would be difficult in a different environment. I wanted to ask a couple of questions that are going to have nothing to do with your books, but I really thought about it. So Rosie, when I wrote to you, I got back an email saying, sorry, I'm on maternity leave, can't contact me. And right after that, you may have run across or heard about a debut by Anna Downs, who is an Australian author who has a book coming out called The Safe Place, which is very much the same kind of book we're just talking about today. And I'm doing an event with her on July 20th, which I will come back to. But anyway, when I wrote to a person, I'm trying to remember, Candace Fox, another Australian author who's been to see us, and I thought she might like to talk to Anna. And I got back the same message. Sorry, I'm on maternity leave. Not accepting anything. Now I have never ever had that.
It's
kind
a
of message.
pandemic.
No kidding. But I have never had that message from an American author. And as you know, we don't have much of a safety net here for anything.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, Rosie, when you're on maternity leave as an author, what does that actually mean?
It means I'm not writing. I mean, in the immediate term, that out of office autoresponder is just to give myself a bit of time, just for the few weeks around birth, because I think also because I have people, I'm in touch with people all over the world now professionally for various reasons, and certainly not all of them know, and it's more just to not let people down. But beyond this point, because I probably will turn that off soon. Maternity leave for me means really not engaging with my book at all, actually. And I often hear authors talking about how when they're not working, they're still ticking things over in their head with their plot. And I don't do that. And I sometimes wonder if this is a sort of creative flaw in me, that even though writing is a creative job, I do very much see it as a job and as my career. And I find that 95% of the time, if I switch off from it when I'm not at my desk, the time that I do spend at my desk is way more productive. And that translates into the way that I write as well. I write in a very structured, very boundaried way. Some would say rigid. And all distractions are cleared. Because when I first started out, I would just sort of sit there and write for hours, and it would be chaotic, and I wouldn't actually, in terms of word count or just, general editorial progress, I wouldn't get very far. And when I started writing in a more structured way, in short blocks of time, with no phone, with the internet off, I found that I was spending a lot less time writing whilst being more productive. And so for me, that extends to my life, beyond my desk too. If I'm not at my desk, I tend not to think about work, and actually I often will shut down thoughts about work when I'm not at my desk. And when I first started doing that, I was afraid that that I would forget it and that I should sort of carry around a notebook. But there was something my agent once said about how writers need to be able to trust themselves, and that we don't need, if we think of some beautiful, piece of imagery or something, we don't need to write that down. She really believes that writers should trust themselves to always have that imagination, and even if that particular piece of imagery never returns to us, that there will be another one. So that's what I do these days, and so that very much has extended to my maternity leave. It means I'll be spending 6 months just being a mum, and not being a mum who's sort of like got a notebook, and sort of writing things in her phone and taking a million phone calls and so on. I did do that a little bit with my first child as well, and I sort of regret it a bit. I wish I'd stayed in that bubble a little bit longer. So this time I was absolutely determined to really be a mum, and obviously with the lockdown that most of the world is in, it's that's been really intensified. I'm having a completely different experience of motherhood this time, because I'm not in any way engaged with the next book, and I'm not really engaged with the world at all.
Claire, what did you do? You have children, if I remember right.
Yeah, I do, but I was a police officer when I had children, so I haven't had that experience. I think I would find it very difficult to take maternity leave as a writer. Although I do have a similar approach to my job that Rosie has, in that it is a job. And so people always want to know, what's your routine, what does your day look like? And when I say, well, I sort of start about 9 o'clock and I sort of finish about 5 o'clock and I'm in my office writing, I think they're always quite disappointed, because I take weekends off, and I take evenings off, and that's just what it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes if I'm close to a deadline, I find I've got to work later, just like anyone working in an office occasionally has to do a bit of overtime. But I have a complete separation between work and home, and so I won't in general come into I will make a big point of tidying my office on a Friday and writing my list for Monday, because I do need to get things out of my head, and so I'll write what I've got to do on Monday, and then I will close the door and not come in. Again, it is my office. But I think a prolonged period of time, like taking 6 months maternity leave, I'd probably struggle with. I struggle with holidays. We went to the States last year for a month with the family. So we went down the Pacific Highway and then across to the East Coast. And I was fine for 2 weeks. Loved not writing. I did have a notebook actually, which is unusual because I don't, very much like Rosie, I think if an idea is good, it's going to stick around. But a month, I didn't want to take a laptop with me or an iPad or any electronic gadget at all. So it was out of office on. So I had a great big notebook with different sorts of categories of things that I might want to brainstorm while I was away. And actually it was the most creative month I've ever had. And I was just full of ideas, ideas for marketing and PR, or for something to do on my website, or a blog post, or a short story, just so many ideas. It felt like it was exploding out of me. And I remember saying to my husband, I've got to try and capture this somehow when I'm at home, because I can't always go off to America for a month. But what I did find was that by about 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I needed to write. I wanted everyone to go away. Wanted my family to go away, and I wanted to be back in my office, and I wanted to write. So I think for me, it's got a shelf life, that time off, and then I need to be back.
I asked the question because I thought that it was probably a boundary setting sort of a thing, and that you each, every writer I talk to has a different process, has a different way of, some work 7 days a week, some, like Stuart Worth's, religiously works 1 hour a day, that's it. Other people, I'm serious. I've talked to 1,000 authors at least over 30 years, and no one does it the same way. So I thought, Rosie, that it probably was your way of, as you say, creating boundaries or a bubble where you could be a mom. But it just, you don't, from the outside, a reader wouldn't think that a writer would ever go on leave. So it was just an interesting phrase.
I always set an out of office when I'm on leave, or if I'm, so when when lockdown started and the children were sent home from school, I put an out of office on because I happened to be between edits anyway, so I wasn't writing, and I just wanted to, it was almost giving myself permission to not answer things.
Right.
So I did put an out of office, although I never say I'm out of the office because it sounds so corporate. So I always kind of say I'm away from my desk, or I'm not looking at emails. And of course I always am looking at emails, but it's that distance. Right. And it's needed actually because of the rod I've created for my own back, which is replying to things in a nanosecond. So people get so used to the fact that you reply within half an hour. But if you don't reply for half a day, then they're chasing it. So actually the out of office is quite useful for that.
You're right. And unfortunately now when people can text, if you're not being prompt with your email, they can harass you by texting you.
Well, that's the thing. If it's truly urgent, they will. The way I see it, there's no such thing as an urgent email. If one speaks urgently, then you can't email them. Even though, of course, that's what we do, and that's what I do too.
I agree. So Pat is over here. Let's find out if he has some questions that he'd like to introduce. Patrick?
So Hank Philippi Ryan, over from...
Hank Philippi Ryan, who's an author of great renown here in the States and wonderful about supporting other authors, has a question.
She wants to know if, because she's read both books, the endings of their books are so twisty. Do they realize that they're as twisty?
Did you hear that question? She would like to. She would like to. All right. She would like to know if the endings, if you realize that the endings of your books are so fiendishly and deliciously twisty.
Yes. Yes, that's the point.
By accident.
That's our USP, and my word, we sweated over it, and we're claiming it for our own. From my point of view, I'm a big planner. I plan my books with a fairly forensic level of detail, and I know where my twists and turns are. After the end is slightly different because it sort of has a structural twist rather than a reveal twist. But certainly with I Let You Go and the other thrillers, I plan them all out. But then inevitably, during the writing of the first draft and often subsequent drafts, those twists change a bit, and almost always an additional twist comes in fairly late in the process.
Rosie?
Yeah, so the premise of Ghosted is obviously man meets woman, man disappears. Where's he gone? And that's all I had when I decided to write the book. So my main task was to work out why he had disappeared. And when I first discussed it with my agent, she said, work out what you think it should be and then turn it on its head, because my the last novel I'd written under my pseudonym had a big twist in it, and she said, I think that's going to be a real strength for you. So she suggested turning that on its head. And so that's what I did. And it's interesting hearing about your big holiday, actually, Claire, because prior to starting to write Ghosted, I spent 5 weeks doing a 300-mile walk around part of the UK coast. And I don't normally allow myself, as I said, to think about work when I'm sort of having leisure time. But I set myself the task for this 5 weeks to work out what this reason was going to be and what the twist on that could be. And it took the full 5 weeks. It was only the very final day when we were walking to our final destination in Plymouth in the southwest of the UK that I finally, after going through a million different ideas and turning them on their head mentally whilst my partner and I were walking, it was only on the final day that I got it. And it was interesting because my experience of writing Ghosted was unlike anything else, and I do think it was similar to what you were saying, Claire, just having that amazing and unprecedented space, creative space, before starting to actually sit at my desk and write. It made a huge difference, and I don't think I could have come up with the twist in any other way. I needed complete space, physical and mental.
I actually I looked up a quote, Rosie, because I was, going back to remind myself of Ghosted in case you couldn't remember who Sarah and Eddie actually were. And I really like this one. It says, Ghosted is a cleverly plotted romantic thriller filled with scandalous twists and turns and a juicy central mystery. Proves impossible to put down. Deliciously addictive, surprising, and sentimental, Ghosted is a must-read for fans of Leon Moriarty and Jojo Moyes. And that's another thing that I think is trending a lot, is to pair you up or put you, with other authors, as we are actually doing at this very moment. In a way to say, if you're a fan of this author, then you might want to read this other author. I have spent years trying to get publishers to let me have more than one author for an event. I mean, years it took me to say that it's better if we have 2 or 3 or 5. Nobody has ever come to one of our events, let's say, who did I have here? Was it Connolly and Rankin, let's say, whatever it is. Nobody ever showed up for Michael Connolly and then chose to buy an Ian Rankin book instead. they always chose to show up for Michael
Yeah.
Alec, and they bought the Ian Rankin book. So, there's enormous potential for doing it. But I do find it interesting to read various reviewers and publishers and all and see who they compare you to. Because oftentimes I don't agree with
No,
who
I
that
do.
is.
Right. How have you found that, Claire? Do you get compared to many people?
Yeah, I do. It's the kind of it's the personal equivalent of the online algorithm, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's those sort of literary cookies, I suppose. We know that you like Jojo Moyes, so we'll recommend this. I think they're quite useful, but they have to be accurate. And I would certainly, I don't think there's been anything on my books where I thought that doesn't really ring true, but I would challenge it if I saw it, because I think it would be unfair on readers to compare it to something that it wasn't. But I do think they're useful, and I find them useful as a reader. I'm trying to think. I can't think off the top of my head whether After the End was compared to anything.
I can compare.
Oh, you can tell me.
Can.
Okay.
I actually can, because I will tell you that in many ways this book, in its central issues, it's Jodi Picoult's book, My Sister's Keeper, that she wrote in 2004. And so if I were selling your book to a brand new person, that's what I would say. If you like Jodi's, and her books are all different, so it isn't, I wouldn't make her a blanket comparison. I would be specific that it was My Sister's Keeper, where the real issue is, what does a child owe parents, and what do parents owe a child when you have a life-threatening, life-ending situation. And your
Well, I'll tell you what, Barbara, that works for me. So if you want to carry on hand selling that like that, then you crack on.
Any other questions over here?
Who are the each of the authors? Who are their literary mentors?
Do you each have a literary mentor that you would feel comfortable naming? One or
Apart from Rosie. Mine would vary, actually. It depends. So I quite often talk about the fact that Sophie Hannah was a huge inspiration when I started writing, because when I wrote I Let You Go, sort of as I was starting to write it, I knew that I didn't want to write a police procedural, even though I was a police officer or newly retired police officer. But I wasn't really sure where it fitted, and then I started reading Sophie Hannah's books and realised that she meshed together police procedure and domestic suspense, I guess, for want of a better genre, and that's precisely what I wanted to do. So that was a real revelation. So she has been quite inspirational. Jodi Picoult has always been a big literary heroine of mine, for lots of reasons. That the storytelling and the unafraid tackling of issues, and the level of research, which is just phenomenal, and I love to hear her speak. I think she's kind of the full package. So yeah, she's probably my number one.
How about you, Rosie?
Well, if we're thinking about actual mentors, which I think was what the question was, I don't have one, but I do have a writing partner, which is something that I decided I needed about 4 years ago, and I'm sure Claire and anyone who has become a writer, having previously had a career, where they're expected to be in a certain place at a certain time every day, rather than this sort of free-for-all when you can just turn up at your desk as and when you fancy, even though actually I think Claire and I both we don't do it that way. Like any author who's come from that. I at first just thought it was the most tremendous thing ever, and could not believe my freedom. I took off to Argentina and spent nearly 2 years backpacking and writing novels, because why not? Why would you not? But after I'd been back in the UK for a while, I realised that I wasn't actually happy with writing anymore. And actually, Claire, I doubt you'll remember this, but the very first time we met at that conference, I remember saying to you, I don't actually like writing anymore. And I remember your face just being like, what?
But you see, I was right at the start, wasn't I?
Yeah.
I was kind of riding this great big high of I Let You Go being a huge success. I don't even think I'd had the disappointment of the difficult second novel, which I ended up throwing away and then starting again. So I think I was just in that new bubble. And yeah, I remember.
Even if you weren't, it would be fantastic. But I knew that I wasn't happy writing anymore, and so in the end, I sort of conducted this forensic analysis on my work life, and tried to work out what wasn't going well for me, because my books were selling well. I had a really great relationship with my publisher and agent. And I finally realised it was the solitude. And I don't just mean the physical solitude of being in a room by yourself all day, although that is difficult because, like Claire, I had a career that was very busy and involved loads of people and, a lot of time pressure and so on. I realised that it was specifically the lack of feedback. And I think there are a few jobs in the world where you don't really get feedback whilst you're working. Even if you're cleaning toilets, people will often say thank you or something. They'll say, how's your day going? They will talk to you about your work at some point. They will give feedback in some way or another. And when you're writing a novel, unless you're sharing it regularly with somebody else, that doesn't happen. And I finally realised that was my problem. I wasn't working in a collaborative way at all. So I realised that I needed a writing partner. And I sort of wrote down a few names of, writer friends who I thought I might work well with, and they all said no. Whatever, I understand it. And then I completely by chance started talking to somebody who I didn't actually know, who hadn't been published, not that would make any difference, but who I just instinctively felt was an excellent reader and an excellent writer, and whose editorial judgment I trusted completely. And so we decided to start a trial period of, I think, 3 months. And we met and still meet every 2 weeks. We email each other whatever part of our manuscript needs looking at about 4 or 5 days in advance. And then we spend up to an hour each talking about the other person's work. And it's a huge time commitment when you're busy anyway, but actually I find that it's like the way I work. Even though it feels like my output should be reduced by committing to this, it's increased.
That sounds phenomenal. I want to.
I could live without her.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look for a great partner.
Yeah, we do know authors here who belong to a writers group or a small circle, where they meet every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But that, to me, has always sounded a little too much like a committee.
I don't like. I'm allergic to committees.
Right.
I started going to a writing group and wasn't there for very long because although they were lovely people and there was some great writing there, I found that people were very reluctant to criticise anyone's work.
Sure.
And for me, that just doesn't help at all. And in fact, I've just remembered, what happened at that group was there was one woman there who was new to the group. I'd never met her before. I knew a lot of the others. And she criticised my work, and therefore I was able to critique hers. And we both left the group, and we carried on sending each other our pieces of work. And we're still very good friends, and actually she is now published as well by Penguin Random House. And so we both kind of ended up doing what we wanted to do. I guess so. I have had a similar experience, but for some reason sort of don't now. And it's interesting to think about whether that might be something that I'd benefit from. I like the collaborative side. I've been doing some screenwriting over the past couple of years, adapting my first book for TV. And I've really loved that process of bouncing a script backwards and forwards.
Are you quite sensitive with your work then? Do you tend to not really share it with people whilst you're working on it? Are you somebody who sends your first draft to an agent and that's to your agent and that's the first time he or she would have seen it?
Yes, unless I'm struggling. So yeah. I had a bit of a crisis during After the End. So After the End is a book that I've wanted to write since 2006, 6 when my son was very ill. And so it was a story that was incredibly close to my heart. And I got halfway through this book and I just panicked because it felt very exposing. And I also worried that this was horribly self-indulgent. And actually, was I writing... So I thought I was writing a book that would resonate with anybody who's ever had to make a critical decision. But at this moment, halfway through the book, I thought, am I doing that or am I writing a memoir? You know, is this actually a story that only matters to me? And so I just couldn't get past it. I couldn't write anymore. And so I sent it to, my editor was on maternity leave actually, and so I was being looked after by a different editor. I told you it's a pandemic. And so I sent it to my temporary editor and to my agent, and I said, look, I'm going to have to ask you to read the first half of the book because I don't know if I can carry on if you know. And so she read it and we talked about it. We actually talked about it at London Book Fair and chatted it through while there was a great big poster of the book above my head, which was really quite terrifying because the book wasn't written yet. And it was all fine, and I really just needed that sort of confirmation from a commercial eye that said, no, you know, your instincts were right. The reasons why you were writing this story are sound. Just carry on and finish it. So I've done that sort of thing before, but otherwise I write my first draft on my own, and then it's an absolute pile of...
Right. Now, I have to check with Pat because, interestingly enough, the phone that is doing this to video tends to heat up and then just kicks us right off Facebook, which is so ugly as an exit. So just a moment while I check and see, are we doing okay, or should we? Good. We are. Okay, is there any other questions?
I thought you were going to tell me off for swearing, Barbara.
No, it's just so inglorious when all of a sudden it just dies, you know, and people say, what happened?
Several people want to know what the authors are reading during this pandemic, and...
Okay, so it's a very common question, but inspirational to readers. They'd like to know what you're reading, if anything, during this pandemic you would like to recommend. Not your own work, clearly.
Oh no, I wouldn't read my own. I'm reading lots. I struggled to read at the start of lockdown. My head was just all over the place. But what have I read? I have... you mentioned audiobooks, Barbara, at the start, and I'm a big audiobook fan anyway. And I've been doing a lot of gardening and listening to audiobooks at the weekends. So I listened to My Dark Vanessa on audiobook, which was absolutely incredible. And in fact, I was weeding and I just sat back on my heels for about 3 chapters because I was completely swept away by this awful, dark, terrible, important story. So if anyone hasn't read that, then that's my big recommendation. Have you not read it, Rosie?
No, I have it. It's next to my bed, but I think because I've just given birth, I'm full of hormones. I'm just not sure I can cope with the darkness at the moment.
It's very dark. Yeah, I was doing a talk with Lou Burney yesterday about the Hammett Prize. He's last year's winner. And one of my authors, Jane Stanton Hitchcock, just won the Hammett Prize for her book Bluff, so I'm really excited about that.
Congratulations.
And I don't really deserve any credit for it, it's all Jane, but nonetheless. But Lou also recommended My Dark Vanessa as a book, so, and I've read it, it's very dark. So, Rosie, probably not the book for you at the moment. I'm going to say goodbye to our Facebook audience, but you two hang on for a minute because there's something I'd like to ask you. So I will say thank you guys. Goodbye to everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and please do buy a copy of Ghosted and Claire's books and enjoy them over the summer.